Maya Chin stood in the elevator of the luxurious Manhattan office building, her hands trembling as she clutched the fake wedding ring she had bought from a costume jewelry store that morning. The gold-plated band felt heavy in her palm, though it weighed almost nothing. What felt truly heavy was the lie she was about to tell, and the desperate plan she had concocted in the sleepless hours of the previous night. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the 42nd floor, and Maya took a deep breath. She had exactly 30 minutes before her appointment with the adoption agency representatives. 30 minutes to find someone willing to pretend to be her husband for what could be the most important meeting of her life. Maya had spent 3 years navigating the complex world of international adoption as a single woman. Every door seemed designed to slam shut in her face. Country after country had policies favoring married couples. Agency after agency had politely declined her applications with phrases like, "not the right fit," and "perhaps you should consider domestic options." The truth was simple and heartbreaking. She wanted to give a child a loving home, but the system seemed determined to prevent her from doing so because she didn't have a husband. 2 weeks ago, she had finally found hope. An agency specializing in adoptions from Eastern Europe had agreed to consider her application, but only if she could demonstrate family stability. The caseworker had been clear about their requirements during their phone conversation. They needed to see a stable married couple who could provide both financial security and emotional support for a child who had already experienced abandonment. Maya had lied without hesitation. "Yes," she had said into the phone, "my husband and I are very excited about this opportunity." The words had tumbled out before she could stop them, born from 3 years of accumulated desperation and disappointment. Now she had to make that lie a reality, at least for one afternoon. The elevator doors opened, revealing a sleek reception area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Maya stepped out and immediately spotted her target. She had done her research carefully, spending hours in the building's lobby over the past week, observing patterns and looking for the right person. Marcus Rivera was her choice, though she didn't know his name yet. She had watched him arrive every morning at exactly 8:45, always impeccably dressed in tailored suits that spoke of both wealth and good taste. He carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind that came from success rather than arrogance. More importantly, he wore no wedding ring and always ate lunch alone while reading financial reports. Maya had concluded he was successful, single, and predictable enough that she could approach him without too much risk. What Maya didn't know was that Marcus Rivera was one of the most powerful venture capitalists on the East Coast, with a net worth that exceeded most small countries' GDP. She also didn't know that he had been watching him for the past 3 days, intrigued by the young woman who seemed to be conducting surveillance on his daily routine. Marcus had built his fortune by reading people and situations with uncanny accuracy. He could spot a business opportunity from across a crowded room and identify a person's motivations within minutes of conversation. The nervous woman in the conservative blue dress who had been tracking his movements was clearly planning something, and his curiosity was thoroughly piqued. Maya approached the reception desk where Marcus was collecting his mail, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone in the lobby could hear it. She had rehearsed her approach dozens of times, but now that the moment had arrived, her carefully planned words seemed to dissolve into panic. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus turned, and Maya was struck by how much more imposing he seemed up close. He was tall, probably 6 feet 2 inches, with dark hair touched with distinguished gray at the temples and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facade. His suit was definitely custom-made, and his watch looked like it cost more than Maya's annual salary as a graphic designer. "Yes," Marcus replied, his tone neutral but not unfriendly. Maya's rehearsed speech abandoned her completely. Instead, she found herself blurting out the truth in a rush of panicked honesty. "I need a husband for 2 hours, and I'll pay you $5,000. The lobby seemed to go completely silent around them. Marcus raised one eyebrow, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I beg your pardon." Maya's face burned with embarrassment, but she had come too far to retreat now. "I'm sorry, that came out wrong. I need someone to pretend to be my husband for a meeting with an adoption agency." It's today, in about 25 minutes, and I'm desperate. I know how crazy this sounds, but I've been trying to adopt a child for 3 years, and this is my last chance. She pulled out an envelope from her purse, her hands shaking visibly. I have $5,000 in cash. All you have to do is sit next to me, hold my hand, and agree with whatever I say. The meeting should last about an hour. I know it's insane to ask a stranger, but I don't have anyone else. Marcus studied her face carefully, noting the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the slight tremor in her hands that indicated genuine desperation rather than calculation, and, most tellingly, the complete absence of deception in her expression. This wasn't a con game or a setup. This was a woman who had reached the end of her rope and was making a last, desperate attempt to achieve something that clearly meant everything to her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maya-chan," she replied, surprised by the question. "And you chose me, why, Maya-chan?" Maya felt her cheeks burn even hotter. "I've been watching people in this building for a week, trying to find someone who looked trustworthy and successful. You seem like the kind of person an adoption agency would approve of. And you don't wear a wedding ring, so I thought maybe you'd understand what it's like to be alone." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. In his 15 years of building business empires, he had encountered thousands of people asking for money, favors, or opportunities. Most had elaborate pitches and carefully crafted presentations designed to appeal to his business interests. None had ever approached him with such raw, unfiltered honesty about a personal crisis that had nothing to do with profit margins or market opportunities. "You realize you're asking me to lie to an adoption agency," he said finally. Maya's shoulders sagged slightly. "Yes, I know. And I know it's wrong. But the system is broken for single people like me. I have a stable job, a clean background check, a nice apartment, and more love to give than I know what to do with. But none of that matters because I don't have a husband. There's a 7-year-old girl in Romania who's been waiting for a family for 4 years. For years. And the only thing standing between her and a loving home is a piece of paper that says I'm married." She pulled out her phone and showed Marcus a photograph. It was a school picture of a small girl with serious dark eyes and long brown hair. "Her name is Elena. She speaks 3 languages, loves to draw, and wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up. She's been rejected by 12 families because she's too old and too shy. I've been reading her file for 8 months, and I know we're meant to be together. But the agency won't even consider my application unless I can prove I'm married." Marcus looked at the photograph, then back at Maya's face. He saw determination mixed with desperation, hope fighting against the fear of another rejection. He also saw something that reminded him powerfully of his own mother, who had raised him alone after his father's death, and had fought the world's assumptions about single mothers every step of the way. "The meeting is here in this building?" he asked. Maya nodded eagerly. "Conference room B on the 38th floor. The agency rented it for interviews today. Please, I know this is crazy, but I'm out of options. I've already been turned down by 6 other agencies. If this doesn't work, I'll have to give up." Marcus made a decision that would change both their lives, though neither of them realized it at the time. "I don't want your money," he said quietly. Maya's face fell. "Oh, okay, I understand. Thank you for listening." "I said I don't want your money," Marcus repeated, stopping her as she started to turn away. "I didn't say I wouldn't help you." Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. "You'll do it? You'll pretend to be my husband?" "On one condition," Marcus said, pulling out his business card and handing it to her. "After this is over, you let me take you to dinner. A real dinner, not as your pretend husband, but as someone who'd like to know more about the woman brave enough to approach a stranger with such an audacious request." Maya looked down at the business card, and her breath caught in her throat. "Marcus Rivera, CEO, Rivera Venture Capital." She looked back up at him with new understanding. "You're not just successful. You're rich?" "Yes, embarrassingly so," Marcus said with a slight smile. "Which means if this adoption goes through, Elena will have access to the best schools, the finest healthcare, and every opportunity imaginable. Assuming, of course, that you eventually decide you can tolerate having me around permanently." Maya stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. "You're talking about making this real?" I'm talking about seeing where this leads, Marcus replied. But first, let's focus on the task at hand. We have a daughter to bring home. The word daughter hit Maya like a physical blow, and tears sprang to her eyes. For the first time in 3 years, someone had referred to Elena as daughter rather than the child you're trying to adopt. The simple word acknowledgement made the dream feel suddenly real and achievable. We need wedding rings, Maya said, wiping her eyes and trying to focus on practical matters. Marcus was already thinking ahead. There's a jewelry store on the ground floor. We'll get proper rings and a believable story. How long have we supposedly been married? 2 years, Maya said without hesitation. We met at a coffee shop, dated for a year, and got married in a small ceremony because we're both private people. You work in finance, I'm a graphic designer, and we've been trying to start a family but decided adoption was the right path for us. Marcus was impressed by how quickly she had constructed a believable narrative. Any other details I should know? Maya pulled out a folder from her bag. I've prepared everything. Our supposed wedding date, how we decided on adoption, why we chose Elena specifically, our plans for childcare while we work. I've thought through every question they might ask. Except the most important one, Marcus pointed out gently, which is whether we actually love each other. That's what they'll be looking for, Maya. Not financial statements or career summaries, but evidence that we're a couple who can provide emotional stability for a child who's already experienced loss. Maya felt her stomach drop. She had planned for every practical aspect of the deception, but hadn't considered the emotional performance required. I don't know if I can fake that convincingly enough. Marcus looked at her thoughtfully. Then, don't fake it. For the next 2 hours, let yourself imagine that this is real, that we're actually married, that we actually care about each other, and that we're actually about to bring our daughter home. Method acting, if you will. They rode the elevator down to the jewelry store in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Maya was trying to understand how a simple, desperate request had somehow evolved into something that felt much more complex and potentially life-changing. Marcus was analyzing his own motivations, trying to figure out why he was willing to commit not just 2 hours, but potentially much more to a complete stranger. The jewelry store clerk was helpful and discreet, asking no questions when Marcus requested 2 wedding bands that would appear to have been worn for approximately 2 years. He chose a simple platinum band for himself and a more delicate diamond-adorned band for Maya, paying with a black credit card that made the clerk's eyes widen slightly. As Marcus slipped the ring onto Maya's finger, she felt a strange jolt of electricity at his touch. The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. How did you know my size? She asked. Lucky guess, Marcus replied, though the truth was that he had noticed her hands during her surveillance of him over the past week and had made a mental note of their delicate proportions. They spent the remaining time before the meeting walking through Central Park, rehearsing their story and getting used to being in each other's presence. Marcus was surprised by how easy Maya was to talk to once her initial nervousness wore off. She was intelligent, funny, and passionate about her work designing marketing materials for small nonprofits. Maya was equally surprised by Marcus's warmth and humor. She had expected someone cold and calculating based on his obvious wealth and power, but he was genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. He asked thoughtful questions about her adoption journey and listened to her answers with complete attention. As they walked, Marcus found himself studying Maya with the same intensity he usually reserved for business deals. She was beautiful in an understated way, with intelligent dark eyes, long black hair that she wore in a simple but elegant style, and a quiet confidence that he found increasingly attractive. More importantly, she clearly had the kind of nurturing instincts that would make her an excellent mother. Can I ask you something? Maya said as they sat on a bench overlooking the lake. Of course. Why are you really doing this? And please don't say it's just because you're a nice person. Someone doesn't build a venture capital empire by being randomly charitable to strangers. Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching ducks glide across the water. My mother raised me alone after my father died when I was 8. She worked 3 jobs and fought every day to prove that a single parent could raise a successful child. She succeeded, obviously, but it shouldn't have been such a fight. The system made everything harder for her simply because she was alone. He turned to look at Maya directly. When you showed me Elena's picture and talked about the barriers you faced, I heard my mother's voice. She would have moved mountains to help someone in your situation. Maya felt her heart constrict with emotion. She sounds like an amazing woman. She was. She died 5 years ago, and the conference room was intimidating in its stark professionalism. 3 representatives from the adoption agency sat across from Maya and Marcus at a polished mahogany table that reflected the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Maya recognized the lead social worker, Mrs. Patricia Hoffman, from their previous phone conversations. She was a stern-looking woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. Beside her sat Dr. Elena Vasquez, a child psychologist who specialized in international adoptions, and Mr. James Burton, the agency's legal advisor. Each had thick folders open in front of them, presumably containing every detail of Maya and Marcus's fabricated marriage and individual backgrounds. Maya felt Marcus's hand squeeze hers gently under the table, a gesture of reassurance that helped steady her racing heartbeat. She was grateful that he seemed completely at ease, his business experience clearly serving him well in this high-pressure situation. Mr. and Mrs. Rivera, Mrs. Hoffman began, and Maya felt a small thrill at hearing herself addressed by Marcus's surname, even though it was temporary. Thank you for coming in today. As I explained during our phone conversation, this interview is a crucial part of our evaluation process for prospective adoptive parents. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his demeanor professional but warm. We appreciate the thoroughness of your process, Mrs. Hoffman. We understand that placing Elena with the right family is your primary concern, and we want to assure you that we take that responsibility very seriously. Maya was struck by how naturally Marcus had slipped into the role of concerned prospective father. His tone conveyed exactly the right mixture of confidence and humility that would appeal to the agency representatives. Let's begin with your relationship history, Dr. Vasquez said, consulting her notes. You've indicated that you've been married for 2 years. Can you tell us about how you met and what drew you to each other? Maya's pulse quickened, but Marcus answered smoothly. We met at a small coffee shop in the village. Maya was working on a design project for a children's charity, and I couldn't help but notice the passion with which she approached her work. She was completely absorbed in creating something beautiful to help kids, and I found that dedication incredibly attractive. Maya looked at Marcus in surprise. That level of specific detail wasn't in any of their rehearsed responses, yet it sounded completely authentic. She realized he was drawing from his observations of her personality during their brief time together to create believable fiction. And Maya, Mrs. Hoffman prompted, what attracted you to Marcus? Maya took a breath and decided to follow Marcus's lead in grounding their fictional history in emotional truth. His kindness, she said simply. Our first real conversation was about the project I was working on, and Marcus didn't just listen politely. He asked thoughtful questions and offered genuine suggestions. I could tell he cared about making a difference in the world, not just making money. That combination of intelligence and compassion was irresistible. Dr. Vasquez made notes while maintaining eye contact. How did you decide that adoption was the right path for starting your family? This was territory Maya had prepared for extensively. We tried for about 6 months to conceive naturally, she said, the rehearsed lie coming easily. When that didn't happen, we had some tests done and discovered that conception would be very difficult for us medically. Marcus picked up the narrative seamlessly. Rather than pursuing expensive and uncertain fertility treatments, we realized that adoption felt right for us from the beginning. There are so many children in the world who need loving homes, and we felt called to provide that love rather than focusing solely on having a biological child. Specifically, why did you choose international adoption, and why Elena? Mr. Burton asked, his tone suggesting this was a crucial question. Maya's face softened as she thought about the little girl whose photograph she had shown Marcus that morning. We researched various adoption programs and were drawn to the need for families willing to adopt older children. When we saw Elena's file, we both felt an immediate connection. She pulled out the photograph she had shown Marcus earlier and slid it across the table. Elena has been waiting for a family for 4 years. She's intelligent, creative, and resilient, but she's been overlooked because many families prefer younger children. We saw in her exactly the kind of strength and spirit that would thrive in our home. Marcus looked at the photograph with what appeared to be genuine affection. Maya showed me Elena's file 6 months ago, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about her since. We've been learning basic Romanian phrases so we can communicate with her during the transition period. We want her to feel welcomed and understood from the first moment she arrives. Mrs. Hoffman looked impressed despite herself. That shows remarkable preparation and sensitivity. Tell me about your long-term plans for Elena's care and education. We've researched schools in our neighborhood extensively, Maya replied. There's an excellent elementary school 3 blocks from our apartment that has experience integrating international adoptees. They offer language support and counseling services specifically designed for children who have experienced multiple placements. Marcus added, we've also consulted with child psychologists about the adjustment period. We understand that Elena will need time to learn to trust us, and we're prepared to be patient with that process. Our work schedules are flexible enough that one of us can always be available during her first few months home. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward with interest. Can you elaborate on those work arrangements? Balancing demanding careers with the needs of a newly adopted child can be challenging. Maya had anticipated this question and felt more confident answering it. I work as a freelance graphic designer, so I can adjust my schedule to be home when Elena needs me. Most of my client communication can be done remotely, which gives me flexibility. And I'm in a position to delegate more responsibilities to my team, Marcus said. Building a family has become more important to me than expanding my business portfolio. I want to be an active, present father, not someone who only sees his child on weekends. The conviction in Marcus's voice was so genuine that Maya found herself almost believing they were really married and really planning a life together with Elena. She was beginning to understand that Marcus's success in business came partly from his ability to commit completely to whatever role a situation required. Mr. Burton consulted his legal documents. Let's discuss finances. Adoption involves significant initial costs, plus ongoing expenses for education, healthcare, and general child rearing. Can you walk us through your financial readiness for these responsibilities? Marcus handed over a folder that Maya hadn't seen him prepare. I've had my accountant prepare a comprehensive financial summary. As you'll see, we're in a position to provide Elena with every advantage, including college tuition at any university she chooses to attend. Mrs. Hoffman reviewed the documents, her eyebrows rising slightly as she processed the numbers. Maya tried not to react visibly to whatever astronomical figures Marcus had provided, though she was intensely curious about the extent of his wealth. This is certainly adequate, Mrs. Hoffman said with considerable understatement. However, we're more interested in emotional and psychological preparedness than financial resources. Tell me about your support systems. Who will help you through the challenges of parenthood? Maya felt a moment of panic. She had no family nearby and only a few close friends, hardly the extensive support network that would reassure an adoption agency. But Marcus responded with surprising personal detail. My business partner, David Kim, and his wife Sarah have 2 adopted children from Korea. They've offered to mentor us through the process, and I've already introduced Maya to a support group for adoptive mothers. Sarah and Maya have become quite close over the past few months. Maya stared at Marcus in amazement. David Kim was indeed a well-known figure in New York's venture capital scene, and if he had adopted children, that information would be easy for the agency to verify. Marcus was either an incredibly gifted improviser or he was drawing from real relationships in his life. Dr. Vasquez looked pleased. Peer support is invaluable during the adjustment period. Maya, can you tell me about your relationship with Sarah Kim and what you've learned from her experiences? Maya's mind raced, but she decided to trust Marcus's lead and build on what he had established. Sarah has been wonderful about sharing the practical aspects of international adoption. She's helped me understand how to make Elena feel at home while also respecting her cultural background. We've talked extensively about maintaining connections to Elena's Romanian heritage while helping her integrate into American life. That's exactly the kind of cultural sensitivity we hope to see, Dr. Vasquez noted approvingly. Mr. Rivera, how do you plan to support Elena's emotional adjustment? particularly given that she's experienced multiple placement disruptions? Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a note of personal experience that made Maya wonder what losses he had endured in his own childhood. I understand what it feels like to have your world turned upside down by circumstances beyond your control. My father died when I was young, and I remember the confusion and fear that came with sudden change. Elena will need patience, consistency, and absolute reliability from her new parents. We're prepared to provide all of that for as long as it takes. Mrs. Hoffman made extensive notes while Dr. Vasquez asked follow-up questions about their childcare plans, disciplinary approaches, and long-term educational goals. Maya found herself growing more confident as the interview progressed, partly because Marcus's responses were so thoughtful, and partly because talking about Elena made their shared goal feel increasingly real. Let's discuss your marriage specifically, Mr. Burton said, shifting to what Maya recognized as potentially dangerous territory. International adoption can place significant stress on a relationship. How do you handle conflict, and what strategies do you use to maintain strong communication? Maya felt Marcus's hand find hers again under the table, and she drew strength from his calm presence. We've learned that honesty and direct communication work best for us, she said. When we disagree about something, we address it immediately rather than letting resentment build up. Can you give us an example? Dr. Vasquez pressed. Marcus smiled slightly, and Maya held her breath, wondering what example he might fabricate. About 6 months ago, we had a significant disagreement about timing for the adoption. Maya felt ready to move forward immediately, while I wanted to wait until some business commitments were resolved. We spent several long evenings talking through our concerns and priorities. He turned to look at Maya with an expression that seemed genuinely affectionate. What I learned was that Maya's urgency came from her deep commitment to providing Elena with a family as soon as possible, while my hesitation came from wanting to ensure I could be fully present as a father. Once we understood each other's motivations, the compromise became obvious. Maya found herself nodding along with this fictional history that felt surprisingly authentic. Marcus rearranged his business obligations so we could move forward with the adoption without him being distracted by work commitments. And I learned to appreciate his thoughtfulness about being emotionally available rather than just financially capable. Mrs. Hoffman looked satisfied with this response. That demonstrates exactly the kind of mutual respect and problem-solving ability that successful adoptive families need. The interview continued for another 40 minutes, covering topics from household routines to vacation planning to emergency preparedness. Maya was consistently impressed by Marcus's ability to provide detailed, believable answers that painted a picture of a stable, loving marriage. When Mrs. Hoffman finally announced that the formal interview was complete, Maya felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. What are the next steps in the process? She asked. We'll be conducting reference interviews with the contacts you've provided, Mr. Burton explained. We'll also need to complete home visits to ensure your living situation is appropriate for Elena's needs. Maya's stomach dropped. They hadn't discussed the logistics of a home visit, and she certainly couldn't bring adoption officials to her modest one-bedroom apartment while claiming to be married to a wealthy venture capitalist. Marcus seemed to read her thoughts. Would it be possible to schedule the home visit for next weekend? We've been doing some renovations on Elena's bedroom, and we'd like the work to be completely finished before you see it. Of course, Dr. Vasquez said. That will give us time to complete the reference checks as well. We'll contact you by Friday to schedule a convenient time. As they gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Mrs. Hoffman addressed them both directly. I want you to know that this has been one of the most impressive interviews I've conducted in 15 years with this agency. Your preparation, your commitment to Elena specifically, and your obvious care for each other suggest that you'll provide exactly the kind of stable, loving home that Elena needs. Maya felt tears prick her eyes at the praise, while simultaneously feeling guilty about the deception that had earned it. Marcus stood and helped her with her chair, his hand resting lightly on her back in a gesture that felt both protective and natural. Thank you, Maya managed to say. Elena means everything to us. As they left the conference room and walked toward the elevator, Maya felt overwhelmed by the complexity of what they had just accomplished and what it meant for the immediate future. The interview had gone better than she had dared to hope, but it had also created new challenges that she hadn't anticipated. "Marcus," she said quietly as they waited for the elevator, "what happens now?" He turned to look at her, his expression serious but not unkind. "Now we figure out how to make this real enough to pass a home inspection and reference checks. And then we decide what we want to happen after Elena comes home." The elevator arrived, and as they stepped inside, Maya realized that somewhere during the past 2 hours, the desperate lie she had constructed had begun to feel like a possibility she actually wanted to pursue. The question was whether Marcus felt the same way, or whether she was simply caught up in the fantasy they had created together. Maya stood in the marble lobby of Marcus's building, feeling increasingly out of place as she watched doormen in white gloves assist residents who looked like they belonged in the pages of luxury lifestyle magazines. 3 days had passed since their successful interview with the adoption agency, and Marcus had insisted they needed to meet to coordinate their stories for the upcoming reference checks and home inspection. "Miss Chun." The concierge approached her with professional courtesy. "Mr. Rivera is expecting you. Take the private elevator to the penthouse level." Maya's stomach fluttered with nervousness that had nothing to do with their adoption deception and everything to do with the fact that she was about to see Marcus's actual life for the first time. During their coffee meeting the previous day to discuss logistics, he had mentioned casually that it would be easier to meet at his apartment to review the details they needed to coordinate. Maya had agreed without thinking through the implications of entering his personal space. The private elevator rose smoothly to the 42nd floor, opening directly into an apartment that took Maya's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Central Park and the Manhattan skyline. The living space was enormous by New York standards, with high ceilings, hardwood floors, and furniture that managed to be both obviously expensive and surprisingly comfortable looking. Marcus called from what appeared to be a gourmet kitchen that was larger than her entire apartment. "Come in. I was just making coffee." He was dressed more casually than she had seen him before, in dark jeans and a soft gray sweater that made him look younger and more approachable. Maya found herself noticing details she had been too nervous to observe during their previous meetings. The way his hair fell slightly across his forehead when he wasn't in full business mode, the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than his serious public demeanor indicated. "This place is incredible," Maya said, accepting the cup of coffee he offered and trying not to gawk at her surroundings. "Do you really live here alone?" "Most of the time," Marcus replied, leading her to a seating area near the windows. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Chun, comes in 3 times a week, and I have a cook who prepares meals when I'm entertaining business clients. But otherwise, yes, it's just me." Maya settled into a leather armchair that was more comfortable than her bed and tried to reconcile the successful, solitary man in front of her with the warm, committed husband he had portrayed so convincingly to the adoption agency. "I've been thinking about our situation," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from her with his own coffee. "We need to address some practical issues before the home inspection, such as..." Marcus pulled out a legal pad covered with notes in neat handwriting. "First, they'll expect to see evidence of our shared life. Photo albums, joint mail, shared possessions. I can handle the financial documentation, but we need to create 2 years' worth of personal history." Maya nodded, though the scope of the deception was beginning to feel overwhelming. "What kind of evidence are you thinking about?" "I've had my assistant work with a photographer who specializes in family portraits. They can create believable photos of us from various stages of our supposed relationship, including wedding pictures. The technology for that kind of work has become remarkably sophisticated." Maya stared at him. "You've already arranged fake wedding photos?" "I've arranged the capability," Marcus corrected. "I wanted to have options available before we committed to anything. But, Maya, we need to talk about the bigger picture here." Something in his tone made Maya set down her coffee and pay closer attention. "What do you mean?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, looking out at the city skyline. When he spoke, his voice carried a seriousness that made Maya's heart beat faster. "This deception has grown more complex than either of us anticipated. We're not just fooling an agency anymore. We're creating identities, financial records, and social connections that will be scrutinized by professionals. If we get caught, There could be serious legal consequences. Maya felt cold suddenly. Are you saying you want to back out? I'm saying we need to decide how far we're willing to take this, Marcus replied. Because the only way this works is if we commit to it completely, not just for the adoption process, but for the foreseeable future. Elena will need stability and consistency. We can't pretend to be married for 6 months and then explain to a traumatized 7-year-old that it was all an act. The weight of what he was suggesting hit Maya like a physical blow. You're talking about a real marriage. I'm talking about a real commitment to Elena's well-being, Marcus said carefully. Whether that becomes a real marriage between us is a separate question that we'll need to figure out as we go. Maya stood up and walked to the window, needing space to process this conversation. Below them, Central Park stretched out in autumn splendor, people moving through their lives with purpose and direction that Maya suddenly envied. Her own life had become so complicated so quickly that she could barely keep track of what was real anymore. You're suggesting we actually get married, she said without turning around. I'm suggesting we legally formalize what we've already told the adoption agency, Marcus replied. It eliminates the risk of discovery during Elena's childhood, and it provides her with the stable 2-parent household she needs. Maya turned back to face him. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Because I can't believe you're considering appending your entire life purely out of altruistic concern for a child you've never met. Marcus stood as well, moving closer to the window but maintaining respectful distance. You're right to question my motivations. The truth is, I've been thinking about this for months before I ever met you. Thinking about what? About what I want my legacy to be, Marcus said. I've spent 15 years building companies and accumulating wealth, but I don't have anything that will outlast me. No family, no children, no real relationships outside of business partnerships. I'm 42 years old, and I'm tired of living a life that revolves entirely around profit margins and market share. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. When you approached me 3 days ago, you offered me something I'd been looking for without realizing it. A chance to be part of something meaningful. To help raise a child who needs what I can provide, not just financially, but emotionally. Maya studied his face, trying to determine how much of what he was saying was genuine and how much was sophisticated manipulation. You want to be a father. I want to try, Marcus admitted. I had a good father for 8 years before he died, and I think I learned enough from him to have something valuable to offer Elena. But I've never had the opportunity to find out. Maya returned to her chair, her mind racing through the implications of what they were discussing. This is insane. We barely know each other. What if we can't stand living together? What if Elena doesn't adjust well? What if one of us falls in love with someone else? All valid concerns, Marcus acknowledged. Which is why I'm proposing we approach this like a business arrangement with built-in flexibility. A marriage contract with specific terms and conditions that protect everyone involved. Maya raised an eyebrow. You want to negotiate a marriage contract? Marcus smiled slightly. I want to negotiate an arrangement that serves Elena's best interests while protecting both of us from unrealistic expectations. We'd be committed partners in raising her, but our personal relationship would develop naturally without pressure or artificial timelines. Despite the clinical way he was describing it, Maya found the proposal surprisingly appealing. It offered her everything she wanted, the chance to adopt Elena, while acknowledging the reality that she and Marcus were essentially strangers who might or might not develop genuine feelings for each other. What would the terms be? She asked. Marcus returned to his chair and picked up his legal pad. I've drafted some preliminary thoughts. First, we'd be equal partners in all decisions regarding Elena's care, education, and well-being. Neither of us gets veto power over the other's parenting choices. That seems fair. Second, we maintain separate bedrooms and private spaces within whatever home we share. Physical intimacy would be entirely voluntary and wouldn't be expected as part of the arrangement. Maya felt her cheeks warm slightly but nodded her understanding. Third, Marcus continued, we agree to give the arrangement a minimum of 2 years before considering any changes. Elena needs time to adjust and feel secure before dealing with any potential disruption. And after 2 years? After 2 years, we reassess. If we've developed a genuine relationship, we can choose to continue as a real married couple. If not, we can transition to a co-parenting arrangement while maintaining Elena's stability. Maya was impressed despite herself. Marcus had clearly thought through the practical and emotional complexities of what they were considering. What about finances? Elena's expenses would be my responsibility, Marcus said. Education, healthcare, activities, everything she needs or wants. You'd continue working as you choose, but without financial pressure related to child-rearing costs. That doesn't seem fair. I should contribute to her care. Marcus shook his head. Maya, my net worth is in the hundreds of millions. Arguing about splitting the cost of school tuition or dance lessons would be absurd. Your contribution would be the love, attention, and emotional intelligence that I'm not sure I can provide on my own. Maya was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the magnitude of what they were discussing. You really think this could work? I think it's the best solution for Elena, Marcus replied. And I think we're compatible enough as people to make it work for ourselves. We've already proven we can present a united front under pressure. But what if we fall in love with other people during these 2 years? Marcus's expression grew more serious. That's a risk we'd both be taking. But, Maya, think about it realistically. You've been single for 3 years while pursuing adoption. I've been single for longer than that while building my career. Neither of us has been desperately seeking romantic relationships. What we're both looking for is something meaningful to build our lives around. Maya knew he was right. Her friends had been encouraging her to date for years, but she had been so focused on her adoption goals that romance had seemed like a distraction from what really mattered to her. Would we tell Elena the truth about how we met? She asked. Eventually, when she's old enough to understand, Marcus said. But children don't need to know every detail of their parents' relationship history. What she'll need to know is that we chose each other and chose her, and that we're committed to being her family. Maya stood up again and walked to a different window that offered a view of the city's eastern side. Somewhere in Romania, Elena was going to bed in an institution that had been her home for 4 years, perhaps dreaming about the family that might never come for her. If Maya didn't take this incredible opportunity that Marcus was offering, Elena might wait another 4 years or forever. There's something else to consider, Maya said without turning around. What's that? The adoption agency was impressed by our interview, but they've probably seen couples who seemed perfect during the interview process and then fell apart under the stress of actual parenthood. If we're going to do this, we need to be absolutely convincing that we're genuinely committed to each other and to Elena. Marcus joined her at the window. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that if we decide to go through with this arrangement, we need to actually live as if we're married. Not just during agency visits, but every day. Elena will be traumatized enough by leaving the only country she's ever known. She can't arrive to a home where her new parents are obviously pretending to care about each other. Marcus nodded slowly. You're talking about method acting on a long-term basis. I'm talking about creating the kind of home environment that Elena deserves, even if our feelings for each other are still developing, Maya clarified. She needs to see parents who respect each other, enjoy each other's company, and work together effectively. Whether we eventually fall in love is less important than whether we can provide her with emotional security. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, and Maya could almost see him working through the business analysis he applied to every major decision. Finally, he spoke. There's one more thing we need to discuss before either of us commits to this. What? You need to understand exactly what you'd be signing up for. My life isn't just comfortable apartments and financial security. I travel frequently for business, I work long hours, and I have very little privacy. There are photographers who follow me sometimes, business journals that publish details about my personal life, and social obligations that you'd be expected to participate in as my wife. Maya turned to look at him with surprise. You're famous. I'm well known in certain circles, Marcus said carefully. Wealthy enough that people pay attention to who I marry and how I spend my money. If we go through with this, you'd need to be prepared for that level of scrutiny. The thought of public attention made Maya's stomach clench with anxiety, but she forced herself to consider it objectively. Would that scrutiny extend to Elena? To some degree, yes. Though I do everything possible to protect her privacy. Maya weighed this new information against everything else they had discussed. The prospect of media attention was daunting, but It seemed like a small price to pay for giving Elena the family she needed. Marcus, she said finally, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Are you attracted to me at all, or would this be purely a business arrangement for you? Marcus looked startled by the directness of the question, and Maya saw him struggle with how to answer. I think you're beautiful and intelligent, he said finally. I'm drawn to your passion for Elena and your willingness to fight for what you believe in. But I can't predict whether that attraction will develop into something deeper over time. Maya nodded, appreciating his honesty even though it wasn't the romantic declaration that part of her might have hoped for. I need to think about all of this. Of course, take whatever time you need. How much time do we have before the agency expects an answer about the home inspection? Marcus checked his watch. They said they'd call by Friday to schedule it for next weekend. That gives us 3 days to decide whether we're moving forward with this arrangement. Maya gathered her purse and jacket. Her mind, Maya stared at the marriage contract spread across her kitchen table, her coffee growing cold as she read through Marcus's proposed terms for the third time. 2 days had passed since their conversation in his penthouse, and she had until tomorrow morning to give him her answer. The adoption agency had called that afternoon to schedule the home inspection for Saturday, which meant she was out of time for careful deliberation. Her small apartment felt even more cramped than usual after experiencing the luxury of Marcus's living space. Maya tried to imagine bringing Elena home to this one-bedroom space with thin walls and a kitchen the size of Marcus's closet. She could make it work, but she knew Elena deserved so much better than what Maya could provide alone. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts, and Maya was surprised to find Marcus standing in the hallway of her building with takeout bags from an expensive restaurant she recognized but had never been able to afford. I thought you might be hungry, he said simply. And I figured we should probably see how we function together in a normal domestic setting. Maya stepped aside to let him in, suddenly self-conscious about her modest surroundings. Marcus looked around the apartment without judgment, his gaze taking in her carefully chosen furniture and the artwork she had created during her years in design school. You have excellent taste, he said, examining a series of pen and ink drawings she had framed above her couch. Did you create these? During my final semester at Parsons, Maya replied, feeling pleased despite herself that he appreciated her work. I was experimenting with different techniques for editorial illustration. Marcus studied the drawings more closely, and Maya found herself watching his face for genuine reaction rather than polite interest. She was gratified to see what appeared to be real appreciation for her artistic skill. These are remarkable, Marcus said. Have you considered pursuing gallery representation for your fine art? Maya shrugged, opening the takeout containers on her small dining table. It's hard to make a living as an artist in New York. Freelance design work pays the bills, and still lets me be creative. They settled at her table with the Indian food Marcus had brought, and Maya was struck by how different the atmosphere was from their previous meetings. Without the pressure of performing for the adoption agency or negotiating their business arrangement, they were finally able to have a normal conversation about their actual lives and interests. Can I ask you something personal? Maya said as they shared vegetable curry and fragrant basmati rice. You're considering marrying me. I think personal questions are allowed. Maya smiled at his dry humor. What was your father like? You mentioned that he died when you were 8, but you said you learned enough from him to be a good father yourself. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Maya could see him deciding how much to share. He was an engineer who worked on bridge construction projects. Not wealthy, not famous, just a man who loved his work and his family. He taught me that being a good man meant taking care of the people you love and keeping your word no matter what. That sounds like exactly the kind of father Elena needs. I hope so, Marcus replied. What about your parents? You haven't mentioned family during any of our conversations. Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always accompanied questions about her family. They died in a car accident when I was 19. I was a sophomore in college, and suddenly, I was completely alone in the world. That's part of why adopting Elena means so much to me. I know what it feels like to have no one. Marcus reached across the table and covered her hand with his, a gesture of comfort that felt entirely natural. I'm sorry. That must have been devastating. It was, Maya admitted. But It also taught me that family isn't just about biology. Some of the most important people in my life have been chosen family rather than blood relatives. They continued talking through dinner, sharing stories about their careers, their travels, and their hopes for the future. Maya was surprised by how easy Marcus was to talk to once his professional guard was down. He was funny, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in her opinions about everything from politics to art to her favorite books. "There's something I need to tell you," Marcus said as they were cleaning up the dinner dishes together in Maya's tiny kitchen. The space was so small that they kept bumping into each other, and Maya found herself increasingly aware of his physical presence. "What is it?" Marcus leaned against her counter, his expression serious. "I had my investigator run a background check on you." Maya froze in the middle of rinsing plates. "You did what?" "I know how that sounds," Marcus said quickly. "But, Maya, what we're considering involves legal and financial commitments that could last decades. I needed to verify that you are who you say you are and that there aren't any surprises in your past that could complicate Elena's adoption." Maya set down the plate she was holding and turned to face him fully. "And what did your investigator find?" "Exactly what I expected," Marcus replied. "Clean background, excellent credit, no criminal history, glowing references from every client you've ever worked with. You're exactly who you appear to be, which is increasingly rare in my experience." Maya wasn't sure whether to be angry about the invasion of privacy or relieved that she had passed whatever test Marcus had felt compelled to conduct. "Did you think I was running some kind of elaborate con game?" "The possibility occurred to me," Marcus admitted. "I've been targeted by people looking for financial gain before. But your approach was so desperate and unpolished that it was obviously genuine. Still, I had to be sure." Maya considered this information while drying her hands on a kitchen towel. She supposed she should be offended, but Marcus's caution actually made sense given his wealth and public profile. "Did your investigator find anything else interesting?" "He found that you volunteer at a children's literacy program every Saturday morning and that you've been sending monthly donations to Elena's orphanage for the past 8 months, even though you can barely afford them on your income." Maya felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. Those donations meant she had to skip lunch several days each month, but knowing that Elena had small comforts and extra educational materials had seemed worth the sacrifice. "You didn't need to tell me about the background check," Maya pointed out. "Why did you?" "Because if we're going to make this work, it has to be built on honesty," Marcus replied. "I don't want there to be secrets between us that could undermine Elena's security later." Maya nodded, appreciating his directness even though the revelation of the investigation unsettled her. "Is there anything else I should know about your process for evaluating potential wives?" Marcus smiled at her sarcasm. "Just one more thing. I spoke with David Kim about our situation." Maya's eyes widened. "You told your business partner about our fake marriage?" "I told him I was considering getting married and adopting a child, and I asked whether he and Sarah would be willing to serve as references for the adoption agency. I didn't mention the specific circumstances of how we met." "And what did he say?" "He said if I was serious about becoming a father, he and Sarah would be honored to help. Then, he invited us to dinner Saturday night, so Sarah can meet you properly, and so we can observe how they function as an adoptive family." Maya felt a new wave of anxiety about the expanding web of their deception. "More people to convince that we're really married. More people to help us figure out how to be good parents to Elena," Marcus corrected. "David and Sarah have navigated international adoption twice. They understand the challenges we'll face better than anyone." Maya returned to washing dishes, her mind processing this new information. The fact that Marcus had real friends who were successfully raising adopted children was reassuring, but it also meant their fake relationship would be subject to scrutiny from people who knew Marcus well. "Can I ask you something now?" Marcus said. "Of course. Are you attracted to me at all, or would this be purely practical from your perspective?" Maya smiled, recognizing her own question from their previous conversation. She considered how to answer honestly without revealing too much about the growing feelings she was developing for him. "I think you're handsome and intelligent," she said, echoing his earlier words. "I'm impressed by your kindness and your willingness to help Elena even though you don't know her. But I also can't predict whether that attraction will develop into something deeper." Marcus nodded, seeming satisfied with her honesty. "That seems like a reasonable foundation to build on." They finished cleaning the kitchen in comfortable silence, and Maya found herself noticing how naturally they worked together despite the limited space. Marcus anticipated when she needed more room to move around, handed her dishes without being asked, and generally made himself useful without getting in her way. Maya, Marcus said as he was preparing to leave, "There's one more thing we need to discuss if you decide to accept my proposal." "What's that?" "Timeline. If we're going to do this, we need to get legally married within the next week. The adoption agency will expect to see a marriage certificate during the home inspection, and we can't risk having a rushed wedding that looks suspicious." Maya felt her heart rate accelerate. "A week. I know it's fast," Marcus acknowledged. "But we're already living on borrowed time with the deception we've created. The longer we wait, the more likely it becomes that someone will discover inconsistencies in our story." Maya walked Marcus to her door, her mind racing with everything they had discussed. "Can I give you my answer tomorrow morning?" "Of course. But, Maya, I want you to know that whatever you decide, I respect your choice. If you decide this arrangement is too risky or too complicated, I'll find another way to help you pursue Elena's adoption." Maya looked up at him, standing in her doorway in his expensive coat that probably cost more than she made in a month. Despite their vastly different backgrounds and the unusual circumstances that had brought them together, she felt a genuine connection to this man who was offering to completely upend his life to help her save a little girl neither of them had met. "Marcus," she said impulsively, "can I ask you one more question?" "Always. If we do this, if we get married and adopt Elena and try to build a real family together, what happens if I fall in love with you and you don't feel the same way?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his brown eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. "Then, I suppose we deal with that challenge the same way we're dealing with this one. With honesty, respect, and Elena's best interests as our priority." It wasn't the romantic declaration Maya might have hoped for, but it was honest and thoughtful, which seemed more valuable than empty promises neither of them could guarantee they'd be able to keep. After Marcus left, Maya sat on her couch with the marriage contract in her lap, staring out her window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably conducting his own final analysis of their proposed arrangement, weighing risks and benefits with the same methodical approach he applied to business decisions. Maya tried to imagine her life a year from now if she accepted his proposal. She would be married to a man she barely knew, living in luxury she had never experienced, raising a daughter who would need patience and love to overcome years of institutional care. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She also tried to imagine her life a year from now if she declined his offer and returned to pursuing adoption through traditional channels. More rejections, more years of waiting, more nights spent wondering if Elena would ever find a family willing to take a chance on a shy 7-year-old with too much history of disappointment. Maya pulled out her laptop and began researching everything she could find about Marcus Rivera online. She found dozens of business articles celebrating his success, photos from charity galas where he appeared with various attractive women who were never identified as serious relationships, and interviews where he discussed his business philosophy with impressive intelligence and thoughtfulness. What she didn't find was any indication that he was anything other than exactly who he appeared to be, a successful, ethical businessman who had built his fortune through hard work and smart investments. His charitable giving was extensive but quiet, focusing on educational programs for disadvantaged children and economic development in underserved communities. The more Maya learned about Marcus's public life, the more convinced she became that his offer was genuine rather than some elaborate manipulation. He didn't need to marry a struggling graphic designer to enhance his reputation or gain access to anything he couldn't obtain more easily through other means. Maya closed her laptop and picked up the marriage contract again, reading through the carefully crafted language that would govern their relationship. Marcus had included provisions for everything from household responsibilities to financial arrangements to what would happen if one of them wanted to end the marriage before Elena reached adulthood. The contract was comprehensive, fair, and completely unromantic. It read like the business agreement it essentially was, designed to protect everyone involved while creating the legal framework for raising Elena together. But, as Maya read through the sections about child-rearing decisions and educational planning, she realized that embedded in all the legal language was a profound commitment to Elena's well-being that went far beyond mere financial support. Marcus was proposing to restructure his entire life around the needs of a child he had never met, simply because that child needed a family. 6 months later, Maya stood in the arrival gate at JFK International Airport, clutching Marcus's hand so tightly she was probably cutting off his circulation. After what felt like an eternity of paperwork, home inspections, and international bureaucracy, Elena was finally coming home. Their daughter was on a flight from Bucharest that would land in exactly 12 minutes. The months since their wedding had passed in a blur of activity that had transformed Maya's life beyond recognition. Their small courthouse ceremony had been attended only by David and Sarah Kim as witnesses, but Marcus had surprised Maya by arranging for a photographer to capture the moment when they exchanged vows that were legally binding but emotionally uncertain. Moving into Marcus's penthouse had been an adjustment that required more emotional navigation than Maya had anticipated. She had insisted on contributing to the household expenses despite Marcus's protests, eventually compromising by taking over all grocery shopping and meal planning. Slowly, the apartment had begun to feel like their shared space rather than his domain where she was a guest. Flight 447 from Bucharest has landed. The announcement echoed through the terminal, and Maya felt her heart skip several beats. "She's here," Marcus said quietly, his own voice tight with emotion. "Our daughter is finally here." Maya looked up at her husband, still sometimes surprised by how naturally she had begun thinking of him in those terms. The past 6 months had been a careful dance of building genuine intimacy while respecting the boundaries of their arrangement. They had fallen into comfortable routines, shared meals and conversations, and gradually developed the kind of easy partnership that made their marriage seem real to outside observers. What Maya hadn't expected was how much she would genuinely care for Marcus by the time Elena arrived. He had been patient with her adjustment to his wealthy lifestyle, thoughtful about including her in decisions about their future, and surprisingly romantic in small ways that seemed designed to help her feel cherished rather than merely legally bound to him. The night before Elena's arrival, Marcus had given Maya a jewelry box containing a necklace with a small pendant shaped like a heart. "For the woman who's about to become the mother she was always meant to be," he had said, and Maya had found herself wondering if his feelings for her had evolved beyond their business arrangement. There, Marcus pointed toward the international arrivals area, where passengers were beginning to emerge with their luggage. Maya scanned the crowd anxiously until she spotted a small figure walking beside a social worker from the adoption agency. Even from a distance, Maya recognized Elena immediately from the hundreds of photos and videos they had exchanged during the adoption process. She was tiny for 7 years old, with long dark hair braided neatly down her back and serious brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with careful evaluation. "Elena," Maya whispered, and then, louder, "Elena." The little girl looked in their direction, and Maya saw recognition flash across her face. They had been video chatting with Elena twice a week for the past 2 months, so she knew what her new parents looked like, but seeing them in person was clearly overwhelming. Maya approached slowly, not wanting to frighten Elena with too much enthusiasm. The social worker, Mrs. Rodriguez, had prepared them extensively for this moment, emphasizing that Elena might be shy or even fearful despite having agreed to the adoption. "Hello, Elena," Maya said softly in the basic Romanian she had been studying. "Bună ziua, draga." Elena's face lit up with surprise and pleasure at hearing her native language. "Bună ziua, mama," she replied quietly, the word mama making Maya's eyes fill with tears. Marcus knelt down to Elena's eye level and spoke in what Maya realized was much more fluent Romanian than her own basic phrases. Elena responded with a small smile, the first they had seen from her during the entire adoption process. "What did you say to her?" Maya asked as Marcus stood back up. "I told her that we've been waiting a very long time to bring her home, and that we're so happy she's finally here," Marcus replied. "And she said she's nervous but excited to see her new room." Maya felt a surge of gratitude toward her husband, who had apparently been taking intensive Romanian lessons without mentioning it to her. His thoughtfulness about Elena's emotional needs had been consistent throughout their adoption journey, from researching child psychology books to consulting with specialists about helping internationally adopted children adjust. Mrs. Rodriguez handled the final paperwork while Elena stayed close to Maya and Marcus, observing them carefully but beginning to relax as they talked quietly with her in a mixture of Romanian and simple English. Maya was impressed by how much English Elena already understood, though she remained shy about speaking it. The drive to their apartment was quiet, with Elena looking out the window at Manhattan with wide eyes. Maya sat in the back seat beside her, while Marcus drove and pointed out landmarks in Romanian, describing places they would visit together as a family. Casa Noastră, Marcus said as they pulled up to his building, and Elena nodded solemnly at the mention of our home. The months of preparation had transformed Marcus's apartment into a space suitable for a family. Elena's bedroom was a masterpiece of thoughtful design, with furniture scaled to her size, artwork depicting scenes from both Romanian fairy tales and American children's books, and a window seat where she could read while looking out at Central Park. Elena explored her new room with quiet thoroughness, touching surfaces and examining details with the careful attention of a child who had learned not to expect permanence. Maya watched her with a mixture of joy and heartbreak, understanding that it would take time for Elena to believe this home was really hers. "Are you hungry, sweetheart?" Maya asked in English, and Elena nodded. Dinner was a careful negotiation between Elena's familiar foods and American cuisine. Marcus had researched traditional Romanian dishes and had ingredients prepared for several of Elena's favorites, which seemed to comfort her more than anything else they had done. As Elena ate, she began to relax enough to ask questions about her new life. She wanted to know about the school she would attend, whether she could continue taking violin lessons, and if she would be able to video chat with the friends she had left behind in Romania. "Of course you can keep playing violin," Maya assured her. "And we'll help you stay in touch with your friends and learn English and anything else you want to do," Marcus added, in Romanian, what Maya assumed were additional reassurances, because Elena smiled more broadly than she had all day. That night, after Elena had fallen asleep in her new bed surrounded by stuffed animals from both of her new parents, Maya and Marcus sat in their living room debriefing from the emotional intensity of the day. "She's perfect," Maya said, curled up in the chair that had become hers over the past 6 months. "She's scared," Marcus replied, but his tone was gentle rather than critical. "But she's also brave. Did you see how she explored every corner of her room? She's trying to understand what belongs to her now." Maya nodded, remembering her own childhood need to catalog her possessions after her parents died. "How long do you think it will take for her to feel secure here?" "Months, probably," Marcus said honestly. "Mrs. Rodriguez warned us that the adjustment period could be challenging. Elena has been in institutional care for 4 years. Learning to trust that this placement is permanent will take time." Maya was quiet for a moment, processing the magnitude of the responsibility they had undertaken. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Always. How do you feel about all of this? Really, not just the supportive things you think I need to hear." Marcus was thoughtful before answering. Terrified, he admitted. "I've never been responsible for another person's emotional well-being before. What if I mess this up? What if I'm not the father she needs?" Maya was surprised by his vulnerability. Throughout their entire relationship, Marcus had projected confidence and capability in every situation. "You've already proven you're exactly the father she needs. You learned Romanian for her, Marcus. You researched every detail of her background and her culture so you could help her feel connected to where she came from." Marcus smiled slightly. "I've been trying to prove to myself that I can do this. Building businesses is one thing, but raising a child who's already experienced abandonment and loss feels infinitely more complex." "We'll figure it out together," Maya said, meaning it completely. "That's what partners do." Marcus looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "Is that what we are now? Partners?" Maya felt her heart rate increase at the loaded nature of the question. Over the past 6 months, their relationship had evolved in ways that neither of them had explicitly acknowledged. They had developed genuine affection for each other, shared intimate conversations about their hopes and fears, and created a domestic life that felt increasingly natural rather than performed. I think we've become more than partners, Maya said carefully. But I'm not sure what to call it. Marcus stood and moved to the couch where Maya was sitting, taking her hand in his. Maya, there's something I need to tell you. What is it? I've fallen in love with you, Marcus said simply. Not because of our arrangement or because of Elena, but because of who you are. Your kindness, your strength, your passion for creating a family. I didn't expect it to happen, but it has. Maya felt tears spring to her eyes. Marcus, I'm not expecting you to say it back, he continued quickly. I know our situation is complicated. Maya had spent 3 years dreaming about becoming Elena's mother. Now Marcus was offering her the chance to give Elena not just a mother, but a father, financial security, educational opportunities, and a stable two-parent home. It was everything she had hoped Elena could have, but more than Maya had ever dared to ask for. She picked up her phone to call Marcus with her decision, then hesitated. Once she said yes, there would be no going back. Within a week, she would be married to a man she had known for less than a week. Within a few months, if everything went according to plan, she would be Elena's mother. Maya looked at the photograph of Elena that she kept on her coffee table, studying the serious dark eyes that seemed to hold too much knowledge for a 7-year-old. This little girl had been waiting for a family for 4 years. Maya could give her love and stability, but Marcus could give her everything else she deserved. Maya dialed Marcus's number, her heart pounding as she waited for him to answer. Maya. His voice was warm, but cautious. Yes, she said simply. My answer is yes. Let's bring our daughter home. Already spinning with the enormity of the decision she had to make. Can I ask you one more thing? Anything. If Elena doesn't adjust well, or if this arrangement doesn't work out the way we hope, would you still want to be part of her life? Marcus's answer came without hesitation. Maya, the moment we bring Elena home, she becomes my daughter, regardless of what happens between you and me. I don't abandon family. As Maya rode the elevator down to the lobby, she realized that Marcus had just given her the answer that mattered most. Whatever happened between them personally, Elena would have a father who was committed to her well-being. The question now was whether Maya was brave enough to trust a stranger with not just her dreams of motherhood, but with her entire future. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, Maya stole glances at Marcus's reflection in the polished steel doors. His expression was thoughtful, almost calculating, in a way that reminded her that she was dealing with someone whose success came from making complex strategic decisions quickly and effectively. What she didn't realize was that Marcus was conducting exactly that kind of strategic analysis, evaluating whether the unexpected connection he felt with Maya was genuine enough to build a real relationship on, or whether he was simply caught up in the emotional intensity of helping her achieve her dream of becoming a mother. The elevator doors opened, returning them to the real world where they would have to decide whether the marriage they had performed so convincingly could ever become more than just an elaborate act of charity. I'll find myself wishing I could call her for advice. Marcus's voice carried a note of loss that made Maya want to reach over and take his hand. Instead, she said quietly, I think she'd be proud of what you're doing today. I hope so, Marcus replied. But, truthfully, Maya, I'm not doing this entirely for altruistic reasons. I've spent the last 15 years building companies and accumulating wealth, but I've never built anything that really mattered on a personal level. Maybe it's time I tried. Before Maya could respond, Marcus's phone chimed with a calendar reminder. It's time, he said, standing and offering her his hand. As they walked back toward the building, Maya slipped her hand into Marcus's, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine that this was real, that she was actually married to this remarkable man who was willing to help her achieve her dream of becoming a mother. The fantasy was dangerous, she knew. After this afternoon, Marcus would return to his world of high-stakes business deals and international travel, while she would return to her modest apartment and uncertain future. But, for now, just for these few hours, she could pretend that she wasn't alone in the world. They entered the conference room on the 38th floor hand in hand, ready to convince a room full of strangers that they were a happily married couple prepared to provide a loving home for Elena. What neither of them anticipated was how convincing their performance would be, even to themselves.